Hello, I'm Louise Blain, and welcome to our horror panel here at EGX Digital 2020. Now, I am currently surrounded in this lovely Zoom grid format by the people who want to haunt your nightmares. They don't want you to go to sleep, they want to scare you via your ears, your eyes. They really just want to creep under your skin and stay there. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with you, David. Who are you, and why are you here to talk about fear?
Hi, yes, I'm David Bergantino. I'm the writer and narrative director of Return One Way Trip.
Perfect. And Barney?
My name is Barney Pratt. I am audio director at Supermassive Games, working on the Dark Pictures anthology of horror games. Current title is Little Hope, which will be released on the day before Halloween, which is perfect.
And Omar, over to you.
My name is Omar Bik, and I'm the game director for Return One Way Trip, our horror game that will come soon in October.
And finally, Ignacio.
Well, I'm Ignacio. I'm lead director and lead level designer in Protocol Games. And some time ago, we released our first game, and Song of Horror, which will be released for consoles also very close to Halloween this year.
Well, it sounds like Halloween is going to be a creepy time, but let's think about how are we thinking about horror in 2010-20? What does it mean to be a horror game? Have things changed? Can I start with you, David?
Sure, the way I see it, with the way the world is today, and is that horror is serving a purpose of both escapism and metaphor. You know, for one, to get away from what we're dealing with in our lives, and the other is to help us explain what's going on in our lives.
What do you think, Barney?
No, I'd agree. I think the escapism aspect is really interesting, actually. I think because it's always been a genre for escapism, I think seeing the increase in sales of video games globally during the current situation, and I think that illustrates that fact. And I also think it's just a really healthy place to be. I think multiplayer horror has been an advance. That's something we've worked hard on at Supermassive, not just us, there's other games have worked on that. And also, I think you can't underestimate the influence of Netflix, suggesting the need for kind of stronger narrative within horror games as well. I think that's been an interesting development.
I think coming back to the fact that you've worked on multiplayer, obviously Supermassive Games, people, when they played Until Dawn, you realised that they really like to pass the controller to each other, and that was what you implemented when it came to Man of Medan. What was that like to think, people want to do this together? Had you seen a response of we want to be able to play it together, we want to be able to pass the controller, or did that feel like quite a sort of bold, exciting thing, different thing to do?
Well, being in audio, I'm on kind of on the back end of that decision, but when we saw it come through to us, we could see the difficulties, the opportunities. We also knew it was kind of essential to do. It's a logical progression for narrative games in general, for people across the globe to be able to network play together. But it's also, it was a logical progression for us as a studio to kind of open that up wider than the two people sitting on the couch play, and make that couch as big as you want, right? It's like anyone around the world can jump in on that. That was a pretty new thing for narrative games for us.
In terms of, we're obviously looking at more single-player games like yourself, Ignacio, looking at Song of Horror as a very claustrophobic, lonely survival experience. Did you take were you looking at particular games that were inspiring you, or did you want to create something that felt quite different from what had come before?
Well, it's a bit of both. I think we of course wanted to pay a homage to the classics of the genre, and we looked to, especially Alone in the Dark was our reference. We wanted to take, the original one, the 1992. We wanted to make players today feel what we felt playing that sort of game, that kind of dread and feeling of being powerless. And so we took a bit from there, but we also, nowadays you have to, there's certain things that people expect, and you have to address those, because otherwise players won't enjoy the game. So we took a bit of both worlds. We tried to be like the games of the old days, but also try to modernize a bit and I think it's a good thing nowadays, because horror is not necessarily associated with a specific gameplay. So as Barney said, I mean, you can take it multiplayer, or you can take single player. You can go with a shooter or have first person, third person, whatever. The good thing is horror is like more like a storytelling tool, not specific to gameplay. So yeah, we took gameplay from everywhere and just horror from everywhere too, I guess.
I think what's really interesting what you say about horror is horror is almost a mindset rather than a specific genre. You don't have to be in the dark. And I think coming to David and Omar, with Return, you have a very different style. We're not in a realistic world where cobwebs and monsters lurk. We are in a side-scrolling world, but that doesn't take away any of the fear. I mean, even looking at the demo and the trailer alone, that eye coming up to that train carriage really frightens me. So tell me a little bit about bringing fear into a potentially quite unexpected place.
Well, you have Omar to thank for that eye. That was a highlight of our collaboration, and really it exemplifies what we're trying to do here, because we've got, even with that pixel art that's not realistic, it's not pulling you into a world like From Until Dawn or anything that those guys do, but it creates a mood. A mood's a mood. If you're creating the right mood with the tools you've got, then that's fine. And then for me, there's a combination from a storytelling standpoint of, well, for one, we're targeting a particular style, both in the art and in the type of story it is, which is an homage to Japanese horror. But the idea, to expand upon Ignacio's point, is that there's the part you do as homage, and then there's the part you do that makes it not a cliche, that pushes it past the homage. And so what I tried to do, and what's very important to me, is I think horror only works if you care about what's at stake and who's bound to lose. So for me, it was to develop the characters, particularly the lead character, Saki, in such a way that you cared what happened, and to develop the story so that it wasn't just a series of jump scares and mood and great sound effects. It was, no, you really cared about this character that you were controlling. Anybody can throw a cat at someone and go, ooh, right? For me, the goal would be to throw a cat at someone, then have it scratch the person, then have the next 5 minutes be somebody scrambling for the EpiPen because they're allergic to cats.
Okay.
Yeah.
Carry on.
And and also we really try to do to tweak the music and increase the tension with the music, because we are a small team and we don't have that big budget to create visual effects or animation. So with the story that made by David, plus the music, that made it even scarier, that there are some areas that actually we don't have anything, but the music will keep the player like scared and cannot continue with the game. Yeah, so that was actually our approach. Story, the narrative design, and the music was priority for us to really increase the horror in the game. And also the vibe, where we have two different environments: the past, where the player goes there and feels safe, to play there. There are no monsters, nothing. But when he goes back to the present, where all the monsters and ghosts are here, he will always have this kind of fear that things will happen here. This is not my safe zone anymore. Yeah, so that was our approach from the beginning.
So Barney can speak to this with extreme authority, but sound has always been a critical element of horror. You've seen it in movies for years, and primarily a lot of it has to do with it has the greatest economy in horror. There's so much you can accomplish with sounds and not show a darn thing. And when you're doing a little game like ours, that sort of economy is critical.
It's subconscious as well. Yeah, I mean, I could preach about this for days. You know what I mean? And I won't do that. But it's subconscious as well, and it's we don't we have trouble describing what we do, and although we might lean on certain techniques and repeat those techniques with different style and content depending on the game, we have trouble describing those moments, and it's a really what's the right term? It's really subjective terminology. So it's even kind of subconscious for us. I'll often just place the guy who I know can do that kind of style over there. Just do your thing over here, it'll be great. And then can this other guy come and help you, and they'll develop that idea together. And it's really about some of the parts. But I find it very hard to describe to you exactly what either of them are actually doing. And yet the emotional response is good. And I love what you guys are saying about the graphics actually and the support of the audio. Obviously, I preach about the audio side and the importance a lot. But I think with the graphic choice in your game, that puts a nice challenge on the audio to kind of really drive and support those emotional threads of the game, which I see as a really good challenge. On some of the VR stuff we did, we limited ourselves by not having any non-diegetic music in the game, and everything diegetic. So then we were forced again to kind of rethink the way we dealt with sound effects, to accentuate those in the right way, or ambiences. How do we make that ambience do the job of that the music used to? How do we make this jump scare pump without a whole ton of whatever we like behind it? It's just that little sound effect. How do we make those things happen? So all those kind of component parts, I love the way you guys are thinking about that.
In terms of, obviously, the VR stuff you did was Until Dawn Rush of Blood, which was when it was almost a roller coaster ride, but genuinely one of the most scary VR experiences that I've had, that simultaneously managed to be the most fun because I was very much in control. And I think one of my scariest moments in that was there was a couple of, it wasn't for arachnophobes, there was a couple of horrible scuttling spider levels that were particularly, really felt like they were on me. And I was wondering, of those situations where you're thinking about how to build without music, do you have any sort of standout sounds that you remember as being, gosh, we nailed that, especially Foley or anything like that?
Well, I knew someone who was working on the Sony stands when they were previewing that game at shows around the UK, around Europe. And the feedback from the stands was it was the oversized pig heads screaming at you as you went through that room.
Yeah.
But that was a gift, right? That was a gift from design. They gave us oversized, well, brilliant, okay. Pig squeals being kind of the core of monster voice in horror. And we've got now oversized ones. And in fact, this was just as an aside, this was just as the loudness standards were coming into games as a compliance thing, but they hadn't quite come in. So we made sure that section of the game was actually too loud, because these are pigs' heads that are 2 meters across, screaming at you at no distance. We allowed that section of the game to be too loud, and I think the loudness TRC came in about a month after we released. So we just sort of made the most of that.
Terrifying, overly loud pigs. Great. So I wanted to say, Ignacio, about Song of Horror, you have that lovely moment where you can stand and listen at a closed door, which really, really frightens me, because I then think about what's happening behind that door, even if that potentially is not. Was that sort of sound element something that you really wanted to bring in as well?
Yeah, in fact, the thing that we hide most of what happens behind doors and use sound to cue players. It's both a tool, because as Omar and David say, we too are a small team, and we don't want to put ourselves in a place where we need to design and make visual effects and that are too big for us. And so we decided to hide most of what happens behind doors and just give hints of what's going on with audio to the players. And that's both, it works for two things. In one hand, we save the amount of work that making all those visual effects would suppose. And also, most of what's going on is happening in the player's mind. It's not, which is I think it's a very good thing with horror, is that it happens in your head, not really, it's not only what you're seeing or hearing, or is what you're imagining. It's about the story you're being told and how you put it together in your head and what it makes you feel, and whether or not you understand it or grasp everything about it, it makes you feel uncomfortable and at the edge, and that, I think that's very, very good about sound, because sound happens, I mean, it happens outside, but it leaves more space for imagination than images does. So images are like less, or maybe if you go for a realistic graphic style, it leaves less to the player's imagination. And if you make a less detailed graphic style, which we didn't, but we should have, I don't know, but that leaves more to the player's imagination, and it makes the experience more rich in that sense. And we tried with doors, with things happening behind doors, and it's not only listening, but there are a couple of events in the game that happen behind the door, and you can only guess what's going on at the other side. And we tried to do that, to leave most of all we can to players' imagination, and the least possible things, explain the least possible or show the least possible. And because, yeah, it's a very strong tool, I think, for horror and mystery maybe too, but horror is essential, I think.
I think that's it's fascinating how so much of it happens in our heads. But I think also what David and Omar, you were saying earlier about, obviously we want to be afraid in horror games, but we can't spend 8 hours terrified. We cannot spend 12 hours terrified. Maybe we only spend half of that. So there's a real challenge of finding a sort of balance in, you were saying, that safe zone that you can find, where you will feel okay and nothing will happen. And then potentially later down the road, you can break that rule. But tell me a little bit about balancing when you're safe and when you're really, really not.
Well, it's sort of, that's something that's fundamental to storytelling anyway, let alone horror, is the cadence of a story and the rhythm of it. Because there's action and there's exposition. There's what you do and what you know. And so you have to leave room as you're going through the story for both. And you have to be careful that you're not doing too much of both at the same time. So you have to, get, especially since it's a game, you have to give people their action moments, their times where they're reacting, they're seeing what's going on around them. But then you have to give them their plateaus where they're synthesizing what's going on, understanding what's going on, and then trying to figure out what they have to do next. And so the whole process is, a ramp up plateau, and you're right. Breaking rules is one of the best ways to spin things off in a story, do something unexpected but not unfair, but keep people in place so that they keep following this story. And meanwhile, these plateaus also give you more of an opportunity to then get into the minds of the characters, so that you're more and more in their world and realizing, geez, I got to help these guys.
So in terms of like the kind of story tropes, or I think Ignacio, what you were saying about needing to sort of satisfy a certain amount of expectations within horror, I think with what you're saying, David, as well, and probably from a lot better perspective of narrative sense than mine, is leading someone down the path of a trope, but then twisting it at the end.
Yes.
That's where some of the best narrative successes, I think, are. Where it's the biggest surprises. Oh, I've seen this character before. Oh crikey, no, it turns out, that's not the case, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, working against expectations done well is super effective. But yes, to Ignacio's point, you can only get there if you give them what they want, for starters, and then dash their hopes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, the twist is very important, actually, and that really, David did really an amazing job with the story when he really balanced everything, and he started twisting the story at the end. And even me, I got confused at the end when I finished the game for the first time. Took me some time to understand, and also to get familiar with all the characters, that he created. We literally created over 15 character with different stories and drama, that will keep the player busy, and to create that kind of like big atmosphere, for everything. And everything is connected, the past with the present, the people in the past, you're gonna meet them as ghosts in the present, and you have to solve things in the present so you can fix things in the past. And so yeah, we also created different like thinking that we in the present we need to keep the horror side always going, and this is where we start introducing like not jump scares but some kind of like scary moments probably every 5-10 minutes that the player will progress with the game. Something will happen and will keep him engaged and and keep the tension very high. And then again, they go back to the past, they need to reveal more about the story and go back to the present to solve or just try to fix things. So this will always keep the player, busy with different things, not only just like cheap jump scares or like very predictable story. And that is the key to make really a good horror game. And the twist, of course, at the end.
No spoilers, obviously.
Yeah.
I think what's especially interesting about that is I think probably everybody watching this, and I know yourselves will have had it, where if you're playing a horror game and you have that desire to move forward and to go on and to progress the story, but you also just can't because there's something around that corner. Or my favorite one I think that I've ever had was in PT when I was standing at the corner of the L-shaped corridor and there was something standing in that corridor. And I suppose it's a question for you as well, Ignacio, is how do you make someone progress when actually all they want to do is stop?
Well, we tried to do it through the story, making the story interesting and making people interested in what's going on. But actually, if somebody is playing a horror game, they want. I mean, that's the feeling they are looking for. They want to not want to do things, like they want to feel that. So I mean, players are a bit in your favor. They don't, because there's people. I've tried to make my mom play the game, and she's like, no, I don't want to go there. Why would I? So she's not a player. She doesn't want to go there, and she doesn't. She stops and she says, why doesn't the guy leave the house? Why is he there? Why is he doing that? So yeah, that's the logical thing. But if you like horror games, you try to go deeper and you try to investigate. You want to know the story. So I think the story is a tool to make, or sometimes the gameplay, sometimes it's the mechanics of the game that make it fun and make you want to know more. And also curiosity is a huge tool, because people just want to go ahead and look for the next room, even if they know that what they're going to see is horrible. They want, because they are curious. It's those kind of feelings that you're exploiting when you're making a horror game. For example, we used a lot of, it's not anything that we invented. It's like something that goes back to the first Resident Evil, probably the backtracking. You know there's a locked room. You want to know what's there. We showed you the locked room in the beginning of the episode, and you need to do a lot of stuff, and then you find the key and you say, okay, now I can go in that room. I don't really want to, but I've been seeing that closed door the entire gameplay, and now I have to go inside. And we also, going back to what David said about the graph of the emotions, like going up and then a plateau, and it's we try to make it so that at the end the game only saves when you exit or when you reach the end of an episode. So we try to make the episode more relaxed at the beginning and then very stressful at the end, because if you die in Song of Horror, if you lose all the characters at the end of the episode, you have to restart the episode. So the ending of each episode is the most stressful part, and then we tell the story after that. So we want players to be a bit relaxed or relieved, like, okay, game is saved, now I'm not going to lose anybody. So we use that moment to tell the story to most of the story part, not everything, but most of it. So we use that also to our advantage, because that kind of feeling that I don't want to go deep in, but it's the end of the episode. If you don't go in there, you've done nothing. You have to restart. Or so I think that's kind of that kind of tools are so useful. Also, that players want to feel that.
Absolutely. And I think I've seen you nodding a lot, Barney, and I really want to ask you, how do you let me know that I'm safe without taking away the dramatic music?
Mikey.
Because I do, and I've played so much that I feel the relief, but I know that many things change orally, and it's really nice to be able to ask someone to say, what does change?
So I was going to dive into something else, but that's a better question. So there's a really nice bit in Man of Medan when, without any spoilers, they're all in a safe place and everything relaxes and becomes a bit of a heart-to-heart. There's a lot of exposition. They did chase there, and yes, the music has died down very specifically. You know, they're not running away from anything anymore, whether imagined or not. So there's lots of techniques we do. A lot of them are kind of classic audio techniques. So there's kind of a mixer snapshot, which is to shift the mix, to balance the mix. On the action, it goes up. On the non-action, it comes back down. But that's not true for kind of the whole mix. So it's true for dominant features of the mix, whatever you want to dominate. For example, when you're in a chase, you want the character sounds to be so strong. You don't need the ambiences, they back off. Now, the ambiences are that continuous kind of bed. Now, if they're gone and everything's really stabby in the mix, then that puts you on edge during the chase. So that all of that helps. And then as you become more relaxed, that Foley kind of beds in a bit more and the ambiences come back, then you've got those kind of continuous elements that the player tires to. And in fact, that's a mistake I made early on with music, was holding this single kind of emotional strand of the music for too long, whether it be high or low. And in fact, that's with the interactive genre and the kind of infinite time sections of horror, which is another big conversation. Like, if a player can stay somewhere for an infinite length of time, how do you keep them on edge for that infinite length of time? And there's, that's another discussion. But something we learned very on was that you just can't do that. So you have to kind of preempt those tirings and kind of shift them into new areas just to kind of keep the interest there, or hold a similar but close emotion and just have it just kind of floating around and kind of predicting what the player is going to tire to. I don't know. I mean, I assume that's the same. Well, that's the beat map for the narrative, isn't it? That's and then on a slightly more granular scale, on a per sequence or per scene basis, deeper in it for the music, I guess. Sorry, I was looking at you, David, for that. I assume he's thinking a similar way.
No, yes, yeah. I mean, this is me agreeing with you, because and you're right about that whole. People can just sit in one place forever if that's what they want to do. But this is where the partnership with the player itself, that Ignacio pointed out, is important, because you're not going to get a player who's serious about playing standing in one place. You're not going to have them making those choices, even though that's a choice.
You can rely on the player wanting to progress the game. I like Ignacio's save motivation for the for the player. And I think the other thing I was going to mention was we feed off the player's desire to progress the game. There's we created very early on in Until Dawn this little mechanic where as the player character, third person, walks towards a doorway, for example, there's a non-diegetic increase in the volume of music or the type of music, one of the stems. So the player can, in theory, walk back away and it goes quieter again. So you can mess with that mechanic and you can kind of, break the experience, break the game. But no one really wants to do that. They want to know what's in that door now. So they kind of, you force them to walk into their own fear. And I think that's the lock. That's Ignacio's locked door. I think that's that perfect example.
And in a way, we don't have some of these devices, many of these devices actually built into Return. So there's no, it's not like Berserk from the 80s, where if you stand in one place, a bouncing ball starts coming at you and you have to do something. You can stand in one place and nothing happens. And so my goal as a storyteller, is to make everything else push the player to move forward. You don't have you can stand in one place, but if you look at the picture of it, you don't really have a choice, because, and this goes to the scope of the game, it's a very constrained, confined space. It's limited. You don't have anywhere to go as a character to walk away. And then you have very strong motivations for moving forward, despite the terror that awaits you, because you've got friends. And then that goes back to you really got to have characters that you care about in this situation. And my hope is that I've created characters that is a big reason why you move forward, is to find your friends.
I think moving on from that, you need your characters, you need someone to hold on to, you need someone to fight for. I suppose I maybe next want to talk about what you have to fight against, and what we are most afraid of fighting against, and what we still find scary in 2020 as monsters. Resident Evil, we've had remasters of. It doesn't seem to get any less scary the more pixels we get. Could we talk a little bit about what you think people are afraid of? Or you were talking earlier about Japanese horror, David.
Mm-hmm.
And that's lots of sort of crawling characters, very uncanny valley-like. Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the visual aspect of it. I mean, and you see consistent through Japanese horror is the crawly, the crawly girl with the hair problem. And really all she needs is a manicurist. But but at the end of the day, if you look at what's behind the crawly bits, it's a very strong emotion. It's hate, it's fear, it's love gone wrong. It's something. A lot of these are about ancient feelings that were so strong. The ghost is not even a person, it's an emotion. And so that was what I was going for in Return, where there are monsters, there are ghosts, there are visually scary things, but the whole story, and even what's behind all of these monsters, is an emotion. And it's an emotion that is paralleled in the journey of the main character. So you're not just afraid of a monster, you're afraid of an emotion. And that is what feeds into particularly the second half of the story, of where this all goes and the revelation of how this all comes together. So it's not just leading, especially for a game like this, it's not just leading to a boss battle for the sake of a boss battle, but it's the resolution of a story, of an emotion, of a character's journey, and scary.
And speaking of monsters, we had a slight, who knows what caused our slight error. So you might have realised that we've now got two people in different positions, but that's fine. You're used to it. But let's continue a little bit of a chat about monsters. And I think, Barney, you were going to say something about what we find so strange and so fearful about the sort of unknown that is within these creatures.
Yeah, I think I think the Uncanny Valley, I think you mentioned this before, but I think the Uncanny Valley has a real kind of purpose in this. I think if it's too extreme, you're not the player or the viewer will not be bought into that character. And I think if you can sit it in the Uncanny Valley where there's an uncomfortable difference. I know we've said that a lot during this chat. We're looking to make people feel uncomfortable. And the Uncanny Valley, but just through its absolute nature, does make people feel uncomfortable. And thankfully, kind of the quality of the characters you shouldn't be feeling uncomfortable with and should be assimilating with and feeling for are now kind of out of that Uncanny Valley, or we've got to make sure they're out, and then kind of contrast that, I guess, with the monsters, with the creatures that might be threatening you. But I absolutely loved what David was saying about the creatures embodying. And tell me, this is badly paraphrasing, so I do. About the creatures embodying an emotion, which of course you associate with, and how fear of an emotion can be a stronger element. That explained a lot to me. That's good.
I think sort of finally, before we sort of wrap things up, a lot of people do a lot of comparing of horror video games to horror films. And these are actually two very, very different beasts where you have to feel very different emotions for characters or who you play as. But I think, David, we'll start with you. And do you think that horror video games and horror movies can sort of inspire one another or sort of learn things? Or what do you think about this sort of symbiotic relationship between them?
Well, clearly the themes and the look and feel between games and movies, they share a lot. To me, the biggest difference is the control issue. Horror movies are perfectly crafted every moment. There's nothing the viewer can do about that. And the added challenge is the interactivity. But that's where the partnership with the player comes in, who is buying into the experience by being there and is not going to, blow it up for no particularly good reason. Meanwhile, I think movies can learn an awful lot from games in terms of challenging expectations about this pacing issue. Breaking down their structures a little bit so that it's not everything is as rote as your typical horror film, and start to loosen up to then make things scarier because you're starting to break with conventions.
And I think, Barney, you've got probably quite an interesting take on that, given the fact that so many of Supermassive Games feel like an interactive horror movie because they deliver us the fixed camera angles, they deliver us a lot of the tropes that horror movies quite often reassure us with, but then you guys tend to twist and turn. So I'd be really interested to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in film as well, not horror films, but I'm going to reference a conversation I had earlier this year in January. I was chatting with a guy in LA, and he did the audio on some of the Final Destinations. And there was one moment that absolutely stuck in my mind, and it was one of the best jump scares ever. It's one of the characters is walking away from the camera. She's looking back at her friends, and they're just on the pavement. There's like a wall of a shop here. She's walking backwards up to the corner of this pavement. She says, "Remember this one, David?" Yeah. Mm-hmm. So she says, "Look, I've had enough of this. I'm going to live my life my way. I'm done." And it goes quiet, and there's a sense of realization. The viewer kind of goes, "You know what? She's right. She can do it her own way." She turns, and then a bus slams into her. She's gone. So it was a jump scare with absolutely no warning that worked, an absolute treat. Didn't have hardly any kind of a non-diegetic support. The timing was perfect. It went quiet just before it was no warning of the bus. Beautifully well crafted. And I was chatting with him about that and about the formulas or the kind of different situations, for example, with jump scares that he employs. And we agreed that there's this kind of basic formula of this rule of three, where there's a riser, a gap. This is purely for audio. Well, it's for timings as well, for narrative timings. There's a riser, a gap, and an impact, a jump scare sting. And you can play around with a combination of these. If the first one you hear is a riser to an impact, that can scare the player, absolutely. But if the second time round the player hears the riser, well, you don't want to be playing the sting straight after that, because that would be absolutely in line with their expectations. You want to play with their expectations. So you leave a gap and they think, oh, it's not going to happen. Then bang, it does happen. The third time they hear this, you want to have a riser, and then rather than a gap or a sting, literally have nothing, just leave the riser hanging. And just have that as a fake scare, and that leaves them completely on edge because they don't know whether that's going to come or not. So he completely agreed with this rule of three, and how that's the perfect number to go, or the minimum number to play with someone's expectations. And so that the similar kind of scare tactics are employed in film that we at least employ in our games, and I'm sure other people do in their games as well. And so I think there's not only a lot of techniques that can still cross over or can be experimented with. I think there's in terms of the content, and I think, David, what you were saying about the games being able to play with the expectations more of the genre, they're slightly more open. I think that's also happening with a lot of more indie content on Netflix, for example. There's a couple of great series we're watching at the moment. I think I think there can be a back and forth. It's less about us borrowing from film. It's more about a back and forth and sharing and developing, because there's such an open framework from a narrative and audio perspective. innovation can happen all the time. It's just change. It's subjective. It's to do. It's how we can expand on the subject matter. It's who's experimenting more and pushing those boundaries, and what we can learn and reapply back into our own projects. I think there's a lot of symbiosis within all of that.
What do you think, Ignacio, in terms of horror films themselves? Was there anything in particular that you wanted to bring to Song of Horror, or you wish you could see in cinema?
Well, most of what we took from films is in terms of story. There's a couple of mechanics that work very well in films that we used. I don't want to make big spoilers, but in general, is when you think we took a bit of from, for example, from The Ring. There's that sensation, that feeling that you're doing something, and then you realize that what you've been doing is not exactly what you thought you've been doing. So that's a tool in terms of story that works very well in movies, and I think it works better, even better in games. Like the some character is doing something, and then he or she realizes that was completely wrong, and I don't know. Things are getting worse because of that. And in games, it's the player who did that. So that's a very powerful tool that we borrowed from some movies. And also in terms of, I don't know, sometimes as Barney said, sound, the way sound gives cues about what's going to happen, and messing with players' expectations. That's very important too. But I feel like games have more power to induce fear than movies, because I mean, talking again about that door that you don't want to open. In movies, you know that the character is gonna do it, either do it or don't. But in games, you have to. You are forced to, and that's a very powerful feeling that works not only for horror but also for many action games. And again, I don't want to say any spoilers, but there's been games recently that make you make things that you really don't want to do it, but you have to. You need to press the button because you want to know what happens next. And that feeling is so powerful, and it's unique to games. It's a unique tool. So yeah, you can borrow things, but there are things that I think they're unique to games, and they're very, very powerful tools.
And I think with those powerful tools of games, we'll have to close the door on this panel. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. I really appreciated it. And thank you for watching. And I suppose all we can say is sweet dreams.
Bye.
Pleasure. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.